Okay, we're back. We're back. My kid had an accident here at church. Church is crazy. Church be like that sometimes. All right, so I don't even know where we were on that.
We were talking about Egypt.
Oh yeah, I said the grass was greener on the other side, right?
Yeah. So real quick, I did have a thought about that. Now
Right.
I don't know if there's time for this one. I'm going to hurry through it. I'm just wondering, do you think that Abraham made a mistake in going to Egypt? Because that's what's confusing to me, is because God told him to go. Where was it? Where was the landing spot? Obviously, it's Israel, but
in the land of Canaan, right?
Canaan. Okay, and there was a famine going on, so he went to Egypt. So it's kind of like, why did God tell him to go to a place where there's a famine?
Right.
So it makes me wonder, was that a mistake? Was that just his own thinking? That was like, hey, well, if there's food there, I'll go there. And then ended up causing lots of problems. Of course, he left with gold and all that. But
and he got, so to me, he got scared. Like he didn't exactly quite trust God, his protection over him and maybe provision.
Sure.
And I don't think he quite knew God. I don't think he knew God as well.
Sure.
At that point.
Yeah.
Even though he did leave home in the promise.
Sure. It still took tremendous faith, right. No question. But yeah.
And so I think he had to learn that lesson twice.
Mm-hmm.
But he learned it. So it's that. And then the other thing with Egypt is you brought up a good example about, they were a big like Mecca for a civilization.
Yeah.
Another thing is that the Egyptians believed that Pharaoh should be worshipped as a god.
Uh-huh.
So there's this idolatry component there that's like.
And tons of gods too, not just
and other gods. That's right.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a spiritual component there too.
Yeah. Huh. Well, you could go on a deep dive on that.
Yeah. Well, that's so the thing with the plagues and the way that they played out is that each plague was directed at a specific deity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have heard that. Yes.
Right. And so God's like, I'm the one with true power, and I'm gonna make y'all look like dunces.
Yeah, like they worship the sun, so he made it dark.
Right.
And it's like, oh, okay. So it's his way of saying like, well, we'll see who's the real guy.
Right.
I love it, man.
I know, it's one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
All right. So what do we learn about the people of God regarding their involvement with Egypt? And what do we learn about God as well?
Oh, I think on that. What do we learn about the people of God with their involvement in Egypt? I feel like it's I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like it's the place of oppression. It really is. Like I said, it was the biggest establishment. The human achievement was wrapped up in Egypt, and sometimes the people of God had to go there. And even at the time of Joseph, he was oppressed there. But even when he became a second in command, there wasn't necessarily an oppression thing, but eventually it became so, because a new Pharaoh took over, didn't know anyone. And he just thought, my goodness, these people are multiplying like crazy. I have to oppress these people. So yeah, it's safety and oppression and safety and oppression. Probably going back and forth. They didn't mention that about Joseph, but I just thought about that.
So Egypt represented something very tangible, and when you're in a relationship with God, you have to be patient. And to me, that represents our impatience. We're continually impatient. And so we're always looking for, the more tangible thing, because it's in front of us. We can feel it and touch it and experience success. But with God, you have to be more patient. To me, that says we're unfaithful. But God continually going back to Egypt to rescue his people, that shows the faithfulness of God to stay faithful to these people who are continually,
Sure.
continually
going back to a sense of security, a feeling of security during famine, during whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. Fourth question. The narrator explains that the biblical authors can subvert our understanding of a setting as seen with Jerusalem. So they use Jerusalem as an example.
Okay.
Based on what we know about Egypt, what does that mean for Jerusalem?
Can you help me with that one?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like it's a two-part question or something.
Right.
Like that.
So we established that Egypt was a place of oppression because God's people were continually unfaithful.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they were unfaithful, they went to Egypt and then they experienced oppression. God had to keep rescuing them.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, when I first watched this, I thought, well, okay, so Jerusalem is now Egypt, which means Jerusalem is so unfaithful that that's how it became Egypt.
Sure.
And that's why people like, what's his name, were ruling.
Herod.
Yeah, thank you. And so.
Okay, so Jerusalem almost represents the anti-Egypt in one sense, in the beginning of it, because it became the city of David.
Right.
So that was like their safety. This is what the city that God wanted to set up. And then eventually it became so bad and so corrupt that, Jesus had to actually go to what used to be a major oppression just for some safety.
Yeah, we're streaming.
Oh,
I'm sorry, but all right. He can watch my phone. Do you want live TV?
He could edit this, but that's no fun.
Do you want my phone? Do you want to watch Daddy's phone?
Oh yeah, cutting the lip. Ooh, that's a good one, bud.
And his nose.
Good battle wounds.
Yeah.
His nose is. I see his nose.
He's still saying ow, like he's still.
His nose looks a little puffy.
Yeah, he probably sustaining a pretty good injury there.
What do you notice anything about his nose other than the blood? Logan, look at Daddy.
He's just saying ow a bunch. He doesn't want everybody to touch his face and whenever we're here.
Church injuries.
Look, it looks like he went through war. I mean, he's kind of. It's okay.
Can that mic pick up all that whole conversation?
Oh yeah.
Sure did. Hi, Dad.
That's cool. I remember when I was in third grade, I was in a private Christian school, and I was walking down the steps, and I missed like 3 steps, and my face planted into a heater.
Ooh,
it was rough,
man.
So I've been there in the church injuries.
What's up, Mr. Andy?
Oh, Andy Smith?
Yeah.
Hey.
Tim and Tim show. Yeah.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Basically.
Tim and Tim show. Go ahead. Say what you're going to say, because I wanted to comment something at the end of this, but go ahead.
Okay. You can go ahead, because that was...
Okay. So I didn't think of the importance of this, because when I sat down to watch the video, it was like setting. We're going to talk about setting in the Bible. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess it didn't matter. But while we're talking about it, I remember one of my instructors in Bible college told me that when you sit down to read one of the books of the Bible, there's usually like a little intro that tells you some stuff. So it's like, that's a real light version of it, but it's important to know what was happening at the time. Historically, what was happening, where did this take place? What was the culture of the time? And that helps answer so many questions. I think setting is such an important thing, because there's a lot of geographical bridges that need to be bridged.
Bridged.
but yeah, so that can tell you a lot about the culture, because I think if you were to just blindly, like in our culture, in our world, if you were to just pick up the Bible and see, like, what does this have to say, and just read through it, you may be really confused. You may be like, what is he talking about? Who is Elijah? And like, why is the prophet such a big deal? But you have to understand like the culture and like where did the office of the prophet come from? Where did the Levites, when did they get established? Why is this established? Why are certain things clean? Why are certain things unclean? So it's a super, super important topic. But
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. And one thing that I'll mention about Jerusalem and Egypt, I feel a little bad saying that it's just Jerusalem's fault that it's like Egypt now, because the Romans were also oppressing.
Right.
So
they were taken over by conquest.
Right. So it wasn't just Jerusalem's fault that it was that way, but at the same time, Jesus.
There were lots of people who wanted to take over Jerusalem, but were not able to.
Exactly.
So some of it is like, how did the Romans get to take over? How did they get to take that over in their conquest? Because if they were faithful and militarily strong and obedient to God, I bet that wouldn't have happened.
Probably not. Yeah.
Anyway,
my 2 cents. I mean, it wouldn't have been carried off into captivity.
Right.
So, all right. Question 5. Have you ever considered time to be a type of setting in the Bible?
A type of setting. I need you to be more specific.
Like the 40 years that they showed.
Yeah.
And I had never considered that as a setting.
Yeah.
That seems strange concept to me. Even
sure.
Even the way that they covered it. So,
yeah. But no,
Yeah.
I have not considered time to be a type of setting, but because it's morbid, especially when you think about that 40 years, we're like, boy, should I say this? Like with Noah, I think about how he's 40 days, 40 nights of rain and how much waiting after that. I'm kind of like, does anybody blame him that he got drunk?
Yeah.
He just got in his tent and got blitzed. The guy's been on a boat forever, man. I'm still trying to figure out what exactly the sin was. Maybe you can help me with that. But anyway,
that he committed?
No,
or
that the son that made him.
So there's lots of interpretations, but I think that completely overreacted.
Mm-hmm.
That Noah did.
Okay.
And that's just my opinion. There are others probably better.
Mm-hmm.
So that's because why would you banish your son? That just seemed, he was drunk. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if Jerusalem, which is the center of Jewish and Hebrew culture, if it became like Egypt, what does that mean that Jesus showed up and ministered there in Jerusalem?
Okay, so if Jerusalem, the center of Jewish culture, became like Egypt, what does it mean that Jesus showed up? Once again, I gotta kind of think on that. Can you help me?
Yeah. So
we need to pre-screen these together so that I'm not like, wait,
Next
this
time
is all new.
Next time I'll send them to you. All right. So we said that Jerusalem became like Egypt because they became oppressive to, just everyday, like the Pharisees, they piled on all these rules.
Right.
And then they had Herod, and then
so you're not even
Romans.
necessarily referring to the Roman rule necessarily. You're talking about like Pharisees, Sadducees, like the religious law became so oppressive, like Egypt was oppressive.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I had never thought about that. Yeah,
but the Roman occupation is still a very real element
for sure.
I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah,
but for me, it's God going back into Egypt to rescue his people.
Oh my goodness, dude! See, I love the Bible, man.
Right.
That's great. Yes, that's exactly what it is. See, I couldn't have given an answer like that. But yeah, they had to do it from the inside out, and had to expose it, had to put a mirror. One of my favorite funny arguments that Jesus had with the Pharisees was when he was talking to them about, that's when he said the famous line, before Abraham was, I am. They say to him, we have never been in bondage to anyone. And I'm kind of like, do y'all own a mirror? You're in bondage right now. Like, what are you talking about? And yeah, you were in bondage in Egypt, like several times. Like, you've been in bondage a lot, and you are now. And, it seems like they couldn't see what Jesus saw. They couldn't see how all of these laws and restrictions just empowered those who were in power. It just further gave them more power, further gave them more authority. And I think he was there to kind of shine a mirror on it and be like, what makes you so special?
Right.
And be like, you think you're free, you're more in bondage than you realize. You can't walk away from this, you know. But anyway.
No, I think that's pretty good. All right, so we're gonna go on to the second video, which is about design patterns.
Like Pinterest patterns.
Oh.
That was a joke.
I don't know anything about Pinterest. So. All right, share audio.
We've been exploring how biblical narratives work, and it turns out stories in the Bible are like any other story. You've got to pay attention to the characters, the setting, and the plot.
Yeah, these are the basic tools an author uses to help readers see the meaning and significance of the events. Now, it's time to learn one final skill that will bring all these elements together: how to detect design patterns in biblical narrative.
What do you mean by design patterns?
Well, the biblical authors have shaped all these elements, character, setting, and plot, to create series of repeated patterns that weave through story after story and tie them all together. When you notice these patterns, you'll see how different stories across the whole Bible have been coordinated to emphasize key themes.
This sounds interesting, but how do you know how to find a biblical pattern?
Well, biblical authors do it subtly. The best way to catch on is to watch them embed key words and images that link stories together. Take, for example, one of the main themes of the Bible, the complex and tragic human condition.
Okay.
So let's start at the beginning, where God is making a really good world.
Right, 7 times it says God saw that it was good.
So those are clearly important words. Now watch. God appoints 2 characters named Human and Life to rule this world on his behalf, and they're told that everything is good for them to eat.
Except for the tree of knowing good and evil.
So then the humans doubt God, and in Genesis we read, they see that it's good to take this knowledge for themselves. Then we read, they desire to become wise. And then finally, they take what they want.
And everything falls apart. This story is about the human condition.
And on its own, it's a really powerful story, but the biblical authors don't leave it there. They turn it into a pattern. It happens again with Abraham and Sarah. God brings them into the promised land, promises them a child, but they don't trust God. They get impatient, and we read the same words. They see their Egyptian slave. They take her and do what is good in their eyes. You get it?
Yeah, the stories match.
Then you get to Aaron at Mount Sinai, and we read how he sees and then takes the gold of the Israelites to make the golden calf. Or there's the story about Achan, who sees the gold of the Canaanites. He desires it and takes it for himself.
This pattern highlights how one person's temptation can create suffering for many people.
Exactly. It's just like the story of Saul, where we read that the Israelites see him. They desire him and take him as their king so they can be like all the other nations.
And Saul's reign leads them to destruction.
Or there's the story of David, which says that he sees Bathsheba. He desires her and then takes her and then kills her husband.
And then David's family starts destroying each other.
So you see, it's just one basic theme repeated over and over. These stories are all designed to show the temptation pattern.
Which is kind of a downer.
But the repetition builds up anticipation. Perhaps someone will come and break the pattern. This is why the stories of Jesus have been designed to carry the patterns forward to their climax.
Really?
Yeah, like what does Jesus say when he's faced with his greatest temptation to avoid dying on the cross?
Not my desire, but your desire be done.
So the pattern flips, and you have one person resisting temptation, and his suffering provides life for many.
Very cool. Can we do one more?
Totally. How about a big one? How God brings humanity through chaotic waters into a new world. It starts on page 1, where God separates these dark, chaotic waters.
Yeah, dry land emerges as a home for humans to flourish.
Then the pattern reappears with the chaotic waters of the flood. God rescues this remnant, Noah and his family, through the waters so that they can step onto dry land and become humanity 2.0. Now, does that basic storyline remind you of anything else?
Oh, right, the famous Exodus story.
Yeah, exactly. That's when God saves his chosen people from Egypt by leading them through the waters onto dry land.
While Pharaoh and his armies destroyed.
The pattern repeats later with Joshua and the Israelites.
They passed through the waters of the Jordan into the promised land.
Yeah, you got it. So now you can see how later biblical authors will project this pattern into the future. Like Isaiah, he hoped for a new Exodus with a new king, leading God's people forward into a new creation. And in this repetition, the nations become the chaotic waters.
So you can see how combining all of these patterns brings us to Jesus.
Yeah, notice how all the Gospels highlight that story of Jesus going to the Jordan River. He goes into the waters and back out again.
His baptism.
That's when God announces that Jesus is his son, who will rescue the world from the chaos of our evil and violence by going into death and out the other side. This is why baptism became such a big deal for Jesus' followers. It's about participating in this ancient pattern, going through the waters of death, following Jesus into the new creation.
These design patterns seem really important.
Yeah, they're actually the main way biblical authors have unified these hundreds of stories together. And every pattern develops a core theme throughout the whole biblical story that leads to Jesus.
Great. That's biblical narrative, which makes up over 40% of the Bible. Now, another 30% is made up of ancient poetry.
And learning to read biblical poetry is what we'll explore in the next videos.
Oakley dokley, I said it again. All right, put your seatbelts on, everybody. Time to get real with this video.
I feel like I could just watch it one after the other after the other. It's so brilliant.
Yeah, it is really good. All right, so the video highlights the design patterns in the story of the human condition. Humanity's fall happened because they wanted to do what's right in their own eyes. So they took what they want, and the results were obviously bad. How does the story of the fall differ from what you've heard elsewhere? So, Tim, I don't know how much television you watch, or maybe from like just random people. How have you heard the story of the fall interpreted by things like that?
You're talking about the Adam and Eve fall.
Right.
Okay. How have I heard it interpreted? That they disobeyed God. Hold on. You're saying how much TV I watch. I'm trying to figure out what you mean.
Just anything.
Sure. So that they disobeyed God and they did what was wrong, and God got mad and kicked them out. Am I answering this right?
There's no wrong answer.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So I've heard that it's because they wanted to eat from the tree of knowledge, and God didn't want them to have knowledge.
Sure. Okay.
Right? But then they miss out on how it's the knowledge of good and evil, and that really means the ability to choose what's right and wrong for yourself.
Sure.
But they don't. Some people don't understand that, or they skip over or gloss over that part.
Sure.
And they just say, "Oh, the tree of knowledge. God didn't want us to have knowledge."
And I think that's exactly the trick that the devil used.
Yeah.
But really, it's like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, but like when it comes to, I don't know, like when, maybe because I'm a guy, but like when you grow up, you start to become a man, you just want to like fight and wrestle and prove how tough you are. And you want to experience that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's just like our nature. Like I want to box. I do. I'd love to join the gym and learn how to box. It's great. I love it. But there's also people who are violent.
Yeah.
And there's a difference there between like what's natural for me to want, something aggressive to test and to test your steel. And then there's people who like if you've ever seen this before, I really don't do it. I watch YouTube videos or something like that, and you see a fight, and it's like violent fight, and you're like, I wish I hadn't ever saw that.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the way that God saw that. He said, you don't want to know about this evil. You don't want to see this. You don't want to understand and know it. It had nothing to do with, like what you said, that God didn't want them to have knowledge, any knowledge at all. He wanted them to be dumb. I think Adam was probably the smartest man alive. He was probably brilliant, but it's the knowledge of evil. I think God didn't want them to have.
Right. And I think another way that I've heard it said is that, well, God didn't want them to have free will. And that's what the fruit was. So knowledge would have led to free will, but
he had free will.
They had free will. The proof is in the pudding. They had the free will to choose to eat from that tree.
Right.
So that's a choice. And then
if they
to
didn't,
choose,
I would. Sorry, go ahead.
to choose not to, that would also have shown their free will. They could have chose to have been obedient to God. But what's important, I think, for everyone to understand is that they disobeyed God through eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, which for the biblical writers was the ability to choose what's right and wrong for yourself instead of God's standard.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And that's the lesson. That's the most important lesson that I think we can learn from that story is the idea that we always think we know better. If anyone has kids, you understand this, where it's this constant struggle. It's like, I am smarter than you. Trust me.
Yeah.
Like, I know what's best for you. But then there's that idea that it's like, well, I'm going to be my own judge of my own life. You see this with kids. You see this with adults too. This
Right.
Just like, I'm going to be the captain of my life. I know what's best. And then they take and then usually destroys them.
Do you have a Bible app on your phone?
I do. No one brings their Bible anymore.
I know.
I love my Bible, man.
If you could pull up Genesis 3:6.
What translation do you want me to be in?
It doesn't matter. So I'm going to read this question. It says, Adam and Eve took the fruit of the tree and ate it because it looked desirable. When they ate the fruit, it ushered in death and all sorts of consequences. But let's look at two pieces of scripture. So can you read Genesis 3, verse 6?
Okay, I'm in New Living.
Okay.
The woman was convinced. She saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her. He ate it too. Go to 7?
Nope.
Okay.
Now if you could go to Matthew 26, verse 26.
Matthew what? 6?
26.
26.
26.
Matthew 26.
Yeah.
Okay. As they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it, and then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "Take this and eat it, for this is my body."
Can you keep going through 20?
Sure. And he took the cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them and said, "Each of you drink from it, for this is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice to forgive the sins of many. Mark my words, I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom."
All right. So in Genesis 3:6, death came through taking and eating. And in Matthew 26, verses 26 through 28, life came through God, or Jesus commanding them to take and eat.
Yeah.
And then that's the new covenant.
Yeah.
So I think, to me, that there you see that pattern, but it's a subversion of the pattern.
Yeah.
God is completely flipping it upside down. So you have all of humans throughout history, starting with the garden, they take for it themselves and they eat it, or they take it and do what's good in their own eyes.
Yeah.
And then you get to Jesus. And then you said, take and eat this. So in the garden, God says, don't take,
Yeah.
don't eat. And then with Jesus, he says, take this and eat this. This is the new covenant,
Yeah. This is the antidote.
right? So you see Jesus subverting pretty much the whole world order. What's wrong with the world in that communion story.
Yeah.
And I think that is extremely powerful the more that you think on it. Like
Sure.
when I first read it,
I love that's we talked about how much we love the Bible.
Yeah.
Those are the things that blow you away. Those little nuggets. And I'll say Paul spells it out very clearly in Romans. I don't know if you had that in there, but in Romans he said, since death came through one man, Adam, in his sin, all were born into sin. So because of one man, or one man and woman, all of men were under that bondage now. Everyone who was born, one man did that. And so God flips it on its head and says, through Jesus Christ, one man, all who comes through him will be saved.
right.
So it's the exact opposite, but it's the same pattern.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Because that sort of, it very much supports that.
Right. I was going to say, it
That's
just
great.
illustrates your point.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what else was I going to say about that? What's interesting is that pattern that they establish of the taking and doing what they thought was good in their own eyes is so much death happened. But we kept thinking that, well, maybe if I take this, then it'll be good. This seems good to me.
Right.
But Jesus was going to make things good through his death.
Yeah.
And they didn't want that, because you remember Peter, he's like, no, Lord, we're not going to let you die. And Jesus basically calls him Satan.
Right.
And so life came through the death and resurrection.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I can't articulate it as well as I want, but it's when you think about all that, I think it really opens up scripture for you.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard thing, is that because our way really does seem like the best. You know, if God were to ask us to do something, ask any Christian, like, has God ever done anything in your life where he asked you to do something and it required faith? The reason it requires faith is because your way looks better. You know, it looks better for me to go to Raised Donuts every morning.
Mm-hmm.
It looks better for me to not, maybe work as hard. But God's way is always better, but it looks like death.
Yeah.
It looks, when you have to get up early and run, it looks like death. You think you're dying. But like, and I'm talking about just the physical realm, all the spiritual things. Paul said we have to die daily. We have to imitate just what Jesus did. He had his will, which when he was agonizing about going to the cross, he did not want to go. That was not his will. But he had, man, I love this. He was in control of his will. And he said, no, I'm not doing it the way my flesh wants to do it, or my will even, not even flesh. But he subverted his will and chose his Father's instead and went to the cross. Because he did this, that provided life for everyone. So God's way always provides life, but it looks like death, And in some cases it is death. You talk about the martyrs in the Middle East, that is actual death, but they're raised to new life. That's why you don't usually ever see fear in their eyes when they're dying.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. Anyway.
Woo boy.
I know that was a lot. Sorry.
No, that's right. It was good. It was good. The video says that Jesus's greatest temptation was to avoid suffering and dying on the cross. Why is that important to consider? And I'll start.
Go for it.
Because when we talk about Jesus facing temptation, we always talk about in Matthew 4, when he was led out into the desert and he faced the 3 temptations.
Mm.
But in my experience, I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about it too much, saying that what happened in the garden was a temptation for him.
Sure. It was the greatest temptation.
Right. The
I
greatest
think
temptation.
it was.
I don't want to die.
I think it was. And I've heard this too from someone. I never thought about this. Going back to his temptation with the devil, one of the things that he was tempted with was he showed him all the kingdoms of the world, and he said, "I will give you this." And so there's the great question: did he have the authority to give it to him? Yes, he did. The devil did have the authority to give him those kingdoms, or else it wouldn't have been a temptation. But I never thought about this. It looks like you get the authority back that Adam gave up, the authority of man and the earth, without having to go to the cross.
Mm-hmm.
This is like, if you don't have to do this. I don't know that the devil understood that. I think in Romans said that he didn't. But Jesus, I think it was a temptation, because it's like Jesus knew what he was there to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But he could have gotten the authority back that Adam gave away without going to the cross, but then that wouldn't include us. We are not a part of that deal, right? So it's like he wouldn't have had to go to the cross, but he wouldn't save anyone. He would just have the authority back, and that's not what he wanted to do. So I think it started there. And then it concluded in the garden, when it was like, okay, push is now coming to shove. What are you going to do? And he was like, I'm going to subvert my will for his. That was the greatest temptation, him visualizing what was going to happen to him, which literally why he sweat blood.
Yeah. Yes. I was thinking about that earlier today, like sweating blood. And it is apparently scientifically
It is
possible.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
So I don't blame him.
Yeah.
All right. Where was I here? Number 4. The narrators talk about the pattern of chaotic waters in the Old Testament. So this is, I don't know why I wrote this question. Does it bother you to see a pattern being used over and over in the Bible? Why or why not? Like why are these scholars, these theologians breaking down the Bible like this and then doing those themes?
Well, I don't know. I don't know who it would bother, but okay, I would love to hear it. I think it makes the Bible that much more sure. And what I mean by that is that some people misinterpret the word because they try to interpret it with other things. But if you see the same pattern again and again and again, when you hear the word water, that now represents something, because it's consistently represented the same thing. Same thing as the olive tree, right? It's usually a representation of Israel. That Israel is a representation of that, and oil is a representation of the Holy Spirit, like his activity, what he does. There's all of these sometimes it's colors, like this color usually means this. So it's like, if you see it repeated, that gives you that confidence that says like, oh, these people know what they're doing. Like, that's just how you interpret that.
I think when I wrote that question, I was feeling really snarky.
You were trying to give it to somebody.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Just a fundamentalist, I guess.
Okay.
So,
I gotcha.
I shouldn't be like that. I really, especially in a Bible study. But Jesus is the water of life too. So how about that?
Yeah.
That's why I think that pattern is important. All right. So this question. Oh, go ahead.
No. That hit me, like the woman in the well.
Mm-hmm.
Any man who drinks from me, you will never thirst again. You will live forever. Yeah. So he is passing through that water. I love it, man. I love it. Yes.
You're doing what I'm feeling.
Yeah, I'm not as introverted. It's powerful, man.
It is.
Boy, that's a deep dive.
It is.
We need to do one where it's just Tim and Tim do a deep dive on everything.
Well, they keep saying that the Bible is complex or it's sophisticated.
Yeah.
And it is. And that's the stuff that shows it.
Right.
And it's okay that it's sophisticated. Okay.
I love it, man.
All right. This question is for you. Now that we've briefly examined these patterns and how Jesus interacted with those patterns, does that add anything to what Jesus means to you?
Oh yeah. So how he was enacted? What was it? Interacted. Thank you.
Interacted, yeah.
Interacted with the patterns was that he turned them on its head. It followed this thing, and then we just needed we just needed someone to break that cycle. And as soon as it talked about patterns, my mind went to Judges.
Oh yes.
We talked about that last week. I think.
Right,
It's
yeah.
like you repented, and then you're good, and then you take, you're in bondage, and then you repent, and he delivers you. It's just a constant pattern. But it was like Jesus broke so many of those patterns. And really, I think the more you understand, like I was saying earlier, like cultural Judaism, the more you understand geographical, the region, the more you understand the language, the more you realize everything Jesus did is mind blowing. From the changing from the water to wine. I remember hearing when Jesus, you probably helped me with this. It was a feast going on, and they were doing something with a lamb or with water or something like that. I think it was water. And Jesus shouted out, "He who comes to me will never thirst again," and or something to that effect. And then it said, "And many believed." Where it's like if you were just reading that, you'd be like, "Okay, this guy's at a party and he shouts something out, and people believe him." It seems insane, but if you understand what they were doing, it was pointing to the Messiah. So Jesus is, in essence, everyone's watching this take place, and he's saying, "Hey, that's me, by the way. I am that person, and I'm here to fulfill that." And that's what made people believe. So he was always turning everything on its head. So that's how you relate to him now. You think you understand how we can relate to him now. You think you understand what he's doing sometimes, and he will turn it on its head.
Right, man. We talked a whole bunch no, it's okay. We talked a whole bunch about subversion, and right here I have talk about subversion. Who's subverting who in the Bible?
Who's subverting who?
Right. So you got the serpent in the garden, the beginning of Genesis, and he wants to disrupt creation. He wants to disrupt, subvert God's intended will. And he sort of does that. And because he tempts the humans in the garden, they fall for it and they eat, and then death, where there's a chasm in between us and God, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And then but really the biblical narrative, the whole Bible really shows us that even though there's very spots in the Bible where God is grieved at what's going on,
Sure,
he's always in control. So he's not really thrown by it, and you can kind of see that, and especially when Jesus comes on the scene, because he is subverting everything.
Yeah,
he subverts the subversive or whatever. So he's taking the world system as it is, caused by the fall.
Yeah.
And then he's flipping everything on its head. And
with your understanding of law, your understanding of God, he flipped that.
Right.
And to the point where I love how it said, and no one, he like just showed somebody up in a debate, and it said nobody dared ask him any more questions, because I realized, like, man, this guy has every angle figured out. And then he changed the way Jews and Samaritans interacted.
Yes.
And he revealed himself to a Samaritan. He changed because just back to the Samaritan thing, it was not customary for so many reasons, but like because of their race, but also because of the gender, and so he was very much doing that. Sorry, you were talking. Go ahead.
That's it. I mean, that's we think we give too much credit to the devil sometimes, I think.
For sure.
But God has subverted the world order, I guess. So when we talk about the new world order, when you hear that that old evangelical buzzword, the only new world order is the new creation that is brought to us through Jesus. That's what the new world order is. If we're going to be biblical,
sure,
it's not some shadow government. I don't know if that stuff really exists, but that's something that I think that we need to think about. In Christ, we're new creations.
Right.
That's the new order to come that
Right.
will be consummated during Christ's return.
And that's the truth, because I think that I can't remember the statistic. I think it's something like 90% of what Jesus taught was about the kingdom.
Yes.
So, but if he was talking about all of the things that the devil did all the time, you'd be like, wow, this devil dude is like, everything was like your own control. Like, do things opposite. You want to hate your enemies, love them. This is a kingdom principle. Healing is a kingdom principle. Forgiveness, grace, all of these things. All he taught was the kingdom. He taught in parables all about the kingdom. So it's like that needs to be our focus. The fact that you're born again, you're a citizen in the kingdom. You need to be focusing on the king, not shadow governments, which could very well be a thing in the future.
Who knows?
I don't know. But yeah, our focus certainly needs to be on the kingdom. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
all right, that about wraps it up. Next week, next week we'll be shifting to the poetry in the Bible.
And we'll consult a poet.
We'll consult.
We're not.
I don't know. I wrote poems.
Did you?
Yeah, but they weren't good. So. They were very emo poems.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. All right. Bye. God bless.